Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. And following the conclusion of a thrilling Super Sunday, I have for you my Gameweek 21 transfer plans. Transfer plans which include the 3 players I'm looking to take out and the many possible replacements, specific player insights within a Gameweek review where we learnt quite a bit, and match analysis as well. For the regular viewers who have not subscribed, for the new viewers who have not subscribed, consider doing so as we approach 6,000 subscribers, and to cash in on some of the luck that people in the comments section have had with multiple top 1Ks, including some top 100s now as well for people who have been following from the start of the season. Drop a like on the video if you enjoy, and without anything else needing to be said, let's hop into it. Standard story of Sanchez is becoming somewhat of a staple piece in these transfer plan videos. I've come to you many a time and said Sanchez was so close to a 9 or a 10 pointer, only to have a late goal take it away, or at least a clean sheet. And yet again, a late goal in the 82nd minute from Mateta meant that he didn't finish on a haul for a goalkeeper, but rather just the 3-pointer. Now, in all fairness, Palace almost definitely deserved their goal. They made enough chances. He produced some brilliant saves. But in general, I thought with their level of performance, they deserved a goal and the threat they carried throughout the game. Again, I'm still very happy with Sanchez. I don't think he's really going to get dropped, especially now that the Conference League games are slowly getting closer to coming back. At least Jorgensen can play there. And Sanchez has been very good in the league in the last 4 games now. So I think absolutely no need to drop him, especially now that we're out of the congested fixture period, at least in terms of the Premier League. The fixtures going forward are ones which at least he has a haul and offer, right? Like Bournemouth pose you a lot of problems from a defensive standpoint. They will undoubtedly have chances, and he'll undoubtedly need to make saves, especially in the way that we're playing at the moment. So, for those reasons, I'm very happy to keep him. I know some people are considering a switch out of him to Henderson, or maybe even back to Sels if they had him originally. But for myself, I really think at the moment it's the least efficient use of a transfer I could make. And the transfers are so important in other areas of the pitch, as we will discuss in transfer plans. Considering there is a fairly strong likelihood that I choose to hold him all the way until my next wildcard, unless I look to move into a Jordan Pickford for the double game, which is a possibility depending on where it falls, then I'm somewhat confident, if not very confident, that I should at least get one more haul before I sell him, and I can come to you and say he did actually achieve that 9 or 10 pointer. At a certain point this game week, this defensive unit were looking like they were going to really help increase my rank through a Sanchez 9 or 10 pointer and a Gvardiol clean sheet, with Robinson's fixture at home to Ipswich to follow the next day. But about 3 minutes later, Gvardiol concedes. Then about 20 minutes later, Sanchez concedes, and I lose the bonus points that were to come with the clean sheet. And then, of course, Robinson concedes twice to deliver a 1-pointer against Ipswich. So not the best showing for the defense, but to be fair, there were a lot of defenses this week that were quite weak in terms of returns, considering Arsenal conceded no attacking returns there, and Liverpool conceded twice, and Trent got a yellow card as well, right? So all in all, I would say for most defenses, unless you owned a Kerkers or maybe even a Vandenberg and actually started him, which in most cases would be quite rare, there wasn't really too much to shout about when it came to the defensive unit. As discussed previously, and as will be discussed in transfer plans, the only player that's really even in remote consideration to be sold is Josko Gvardiol. He's actually got some strong consideration behind him, but the other 4 will be going absolutely nowhere. Delighted to own them. Delighted with the decision and outcome to bench Gabriel over João Pedro and Lewis Hall. Yes, Lewis Hall probably had a harder fixture in terms of keeping a clean sheet, but he maximized my upside, especially with the routes to points largely being with and through Isak and Gordon. Similarly, I had a good feel on João Pedro, and I thought that Brighton can score, as I expressed. So, especially considering I didn't have Arsenal defense, I benched Gabriel and it works out. Obviously, the penalty certainly caused some controversy. I don't have a particularly strong opinion on it, so give it, and you can debate between yourselves. But yeah, quite happy with that. That was going to be the real killer to my rank if the game wasn't to get cancelled today at 4:30 and Arsenal were to clean. But thankfully, the best possible outcome was João Pedro scoring, picking up maximum bonus, and Arsenal conceding. So yeah, now let's go on to the midfield where most of the talking points lie. I actually missed the first 7 minutes of Newcastle versus Spurs, nor was I on my phone for it either. So when I tuned in to see that Anthony Gordon had already scored for myself, I thought this is an absolutely beautiful and brilliant start to the game week. Realistically, he should have had more. That chance where I think Murphy puts it across and Isak gets a touch, when if he had left it for Gordon, probably should have left it for Gordon. It's a tap in, and it's 2-1 at that point. That could have been a Gordon brace. There was a chance in the second half as well where it falls to him so nicely and he just blazes over the bar. He really could have had more, should have had more, but a 7-pointer is quite respectable, all things considering. Foden, this is where I got a bit lucky, I would say. So whilst Gordon probably should have got more, Foden probably should have got less on the back of the performance and, again, the fact that he's playing at right wing. If he was to perform like this at number 10, okay, then I would really, really be considering selling him. But given it was at right wing and given the fact he got a goal, and you know what? Maybe he just needed this, right? It's his first goal in the Premier League this season. Just gives him a little bit of momentum, hopefully. And he's got a good record away at Brentford, obviously scoring a hat-trick at the G-Tech last season. So it makes it a slightly tougher sell, but we'll talk about that later. And then obviously the big thing for me this week was the captaincy. And thankfully, it went well and I got it right. I thought Cole Palmer definitely should have had more, especially considering the early goal, the chances Jackson missed. I thought maybe that should have been given, a penalty should have been given for the quote-unquote foul on Neto, but I understand that's somewhat subjective and maybe a little bit of bias kicking in there. But yeah, I thought he had a good game as well. Palace definitely grew into it more, but a 9-pointer was still decent. A little bit annoying to lose the 1 bonus point and the clean sheet point at the end through Mateta's goal, but so be it. And with relation to Salah, I thought United played exactly kind of how I expected. They were really solid from a defensive standpoint. I'm going to come on to this in the match analysis section. And Salah didn't really have too much. I thought there were certainly moments in the first half where I was a little bit scared. And initially, when he had Dalot isolated and he clipped that ball into McAllister, they need to fix this. And they did. And they actually ended up responding really well, even to the threat Liverpool posed on their right-hand side. I really did think Onana saved the penalty, and it was going to be a fairly decent-sized swing, / big swing on the captaincy. But it wasn't to be, and I'll take a 2-point win there. And I'm kind of just happy that I went through with the decision regardless of the outcome. And now let's go on to the forwards. Moving on to the forwards, who knows, maybe if Morgan Rogers wasn't suspended, I would not be sitting here with a João Pedro 9-pointer. And in fact, that's the most likely case. But he was suspended, so here I am. I thought overall he played quite well, and we'll come on to this later in the match analysis section. I do think that at the moment his ceiling is capped by what Brighton are giving him and how he's having to interact within the side, but we'll get onto that later. A well-taken penalty, and like I said, the feel here just played off and the analysis beforehand. Isak probably didn't have the game many of us expected. I think everyone expected a little bit more threat to be generated by himself and for him to at least look like he was going to haul bigger. But in the end, I would say a 7 to a 9-pointer was a fair result for pretty much everyone who owned him. Nicholas Jackson, obviously people are frustrated yet again because he had 2 big chances, missed them both, and didn't return. When we get to transfer plans, I'll speak about him a little bit more. But what I would say is I don't think those 2 misses, especially the first one, are anywhere near as bad as people are making out to be, especially the first one. The second one, yeah, okay, we can argue a little bit more. But the first one, we'll get onto it in transfer plans. But I don't think it was so bad. He is a real conundrum, and it's very, very difficult to have what I would say is a strong view on the subject where you're absolutely adamant you are right, whether you should be selling or keeping, because there are just so many variables associated to him, some positive, some negative, all of which we will discuss in transfer plans. But for now, let's move on to match analysis. The general outlook on this game prior to it starting was that Newcastle could have a really good day away at Spurs. And then when the reports came out about the injuries and the illnesses and the players who would be starting as a result, I would say in a positive way for Newcastle, that general outlook was certainly amplified. However, it certainly didn't start that way. Newcastle, I wouldn't say, had a strong foothold in the game, and Spurs certainly looked somewhat threatening at least, and it wasn't a very settled game. However, Eddie Howe then showed his adaptability again, and he's done that so many times this season that he did it again. He moves Bruno G deeper. Now he's had Tonali at the base, and Joe Linton left 8, Bruno right 8. And in general, one of the main reasons for that was he needed a passer, right, slightly higher up the field to help Gordon, to help Murphy, to help Isak. But not only that, just having a general creative against those deeper blocks as well was something that was going to be very useful to him. However, his tempo setter is also really Bruno Guimaraes. So taking him out of that 6, taking him out of the base, means that at times the game can become a little bit quicker than you would want, especially against a side like Spurs, who almost lure you into that type of game. You don't really have a choice but to engage. However, around the 25th, 30th minute, he drops Bruno Guimaraes deeper alongside Tonali, almost forming a double pivot of sorts. And having Bruno G in these deeper areas, I thought was a wonderful solution to being able to control the game a little bit better. And from there, Newcastle had a very strong second half of the first half. And I would say that was their best bit in the game by quite some way. Bruno Guimaraes then found himself higher up the pitch once the lead was established in the second half. And it probably didn't work quite as well. But nonetheless, when he did drop him into that, he was excellent. Who else was excellent? Tino Livramento. I thought 1v1, again, it was another brilliant display from him. the one that stands out to me was Martinelli early in the season. Defending Martinelli 1v1, and when it really is 1v1 consistently, is a very difficult task, but he won every single duel between the two, and he did it again. Obviously, the problem that Timo Werner poses you is slightly different to that of a Son Heung-min, and Son Heung-min definitely got the better of him once, but even in general, he definitely performed well against Son for the rest of the game. Reguilón's cameo was really interesting to myself, and it was something that I wanted to speak about. One thing I've spoken about repeatedly on X and here to an extent is that when Udogie plays on that left-hand side and Son holds the width and it's Udogie in the half spaces, I personally have not favored that dynamic given the type of player Udogie is, given the fact that he's not so comfortable facilitating those small space combinations, given that he's probably better overlapping and putting in those crosses, given that Son's far better, in my opinion, and far more threatening in those half spaces, and it also allows him to leverage his ball striking, not to mention the quality to be able to combine in those small spaces and create something from there. But Reguilón, one thing I noticed is the first attack that I saw him really go up for, he actually went on the overlap for Son, and Son came inside. And the other thing is, even when he was a little bit deeper than Son, and he had to combine, he was more comfortable doing so, which is natural given the type of player he is. So I'm wondering if actually having a left footer there, as opposed to having Jed Spence there, right, when Pedro Porro plays at right back, and allowing him to overlap and having Son come inside, could actually be a really good solution for Spurs. And in a way, potentially, this could be a little bit of a blessing in disguise compared to what they initially thought when Udogie is out. So that's certainly something to consider. One thing, and if so, then I think Spurs as an attack will become better because there's probably, we'll talk about the creative over-reliance on the whole side as a result of what Solanke's doing, in my opinion. But I think Son could certainly help solve this, and also he'll just bring goals back to the side where he hasn't been scoring too much this season given the role. One thing that I did forget to mention on Bruno Guimaraes, and this is something I'm going to talk about in Liverpool Man United as well, switches of play against these deeper, well-settled blocks have been so useful. And even on transition, Bruno Guimaraes has been executing them so well. And given the recipients are Hall and Gordon, they've then been executed when finding themselves in isolated situations. So I think this weapon that he has in particular, the passing range he has, which so many other people in the league don't have, okay, fine, maybe they have the dueling capacity, not even to the same extent. But this passing range, they don't have as well. And it's why he is one of the best midfielders in the Premier League, without doubt. Austin, Bergvall, and Gray, the young guys, really, really solid performances from all of them. And I thought I would just give them the recognition that, to be quite frank, they deserve. Solanke's performances and role in this Spurs side have certainly been interesting. I would say he's very comfortable when you go along to him, given he's a fantastic physical presence. And in general, he's very good in the air. However, not having the box crashing type, not having the type whose natural instinct is to get on the end of these flicks and then really almost crash the box or just progress in that manner, I think almost take away the upside from that particular skill set. Yes, he's a very good presser. I don't think anyone's denying that again. And I think he's fantastic at pinning the centre-backs in and around the box, and somewhat similar to Chris Wood in settled possession when your side have the ball and he's in and around the box and the opposition is in a slightly deeper block. I think, again, very useful there. However, this number 9 role in this and side requires something slightly different to that of Bournemouth. And I would say his zone of occupant is slightly bigger. And because it's slightly bigger and because he's getting pulled into positions more regularly that he probably wasn't getting so at Bournemouth, and because in general, the way Spurs are building is slightly different, and how they're trying to create their chances, I would say it requires a wider variety and wider range of technical actions, which I don't think he's completely comfortable with at the moment. Thus, I think a somewhat creative over-reliance forms on the 2-8s. And at times, it's just Kulusevski playing as an 8 without Maddison, right? And because you have a right winger who's right-footed, right, there's not really too much he can do to help in terms of creativity when the blocks well settled, and in general, when Spurs are slightly deeper as well. Okay, Porro's crosses from that right side are very helpful in having that angle, but you want a little bit more. As mentioned initially, I thought that interesting, hence I'm sharing. And just in general, maybe going forward, if you are to be considering Spurs attacking assets, I would just consider that factor in terms of where their creativity is going to be at for a particular game and how that maybe problem, you could call it, would interact within the fixtures that you're looking at acquiring them for. This game did indeed have similarities to when Manchester City came to the Amex. Initially, Brighton pressed them in a 4-2-4. I'm talking about the game with Manchester City in a fairly lethargic press. Fabian Hertzler recognizes this. He doesn't really like this. He brings on Belieber in the second half, who, as you would have seen against Arsenal, is an unbelievable player and really injects that sense of intensity into your side through his elite level of physicality. And as such, they go on to win the game and give Manchester City a very tough second half. Here, and I actually spoke about this in the analysis channel within our community, where I wasn't really happy with Bruno's selection following the first half performance and what he was offering you. Then Minter comes on and he also brings off Matt O'Reilly. And as such, Brighton then in the second half, I thought had a bit more of a punch. And when they were going forward, they looked a little bit more threatening, especially having Minter on that right side and even Jorginho Ruta in the middle. Continuing with their attack as the subject of the discussion, I thought, again, it was a very similar type of performance to ones they've had of late. They showed promise, and if it was just for one specific type of profile being in the side, a number 9 who you could bounce off, a number 9 who would also stretch the last line, then they could have really profited, especially with the competence and the level João Pedro is showing. Now, I'd read some things that Brighton fans weren't too happy with João Pedro's performance level at the moment, and I would say what you're asking for him within that number 9 role, within this side, we're asking for so much, right? Like, he's still brilliant when he's in those slightly deeper areas and in combining within small spaces and just combining in general, right? And finding solutions, even on transition at times, just to hold the ball up, to take the ball a little bit wider, to release at the right time, to find the right pass. He's so good at all of that. He's just not the type that you're going to look to bounce off and go long into. And also, he's not the type to stretch the last line whereby he's going to create space and opportunities for other players in that particular manner, right? But if they were to have that and then him at 10 with the quality of wingers they have and the attacking talent at their disposal, I thought, yeah, they will cause teams a lot of problems. And they had done so in this season when Danny Welbeck was fit. But yeah, I thought, again, he was the best attacking player. And just because he's not getting or generating as many chances for himself or others as maybe he has done in the past, I don't really think it's his fault, and he's still putting in a very good level. And if they had anyone else at 9, then I think they'd struggle even more than they probably have done in this recent period. I thought the defensive approach was one that I really liked, at times quite an aggressive press, and probably not the same level of aggression as they did against Manchester City. I think one reason for that is having Jorginho at the base. You kind of know that's pretty difficult to dispossess them in that section, especially when you have Saliba, who's also very good on the ball. Secondly, the fact that they did take a more defensive approach when they won the ball back. In general, they were slightly higher up the pitch. They had a little bit more of a territorial dominance than most would expect against Arsenal. Most sides have been able to do, and as such, they could not so much create, because they didn't create too much from there, but at least sustain some sort of pressure and take the pressure off themselves from a defensive standpoint. They also built in a way that I thought was fairly interesting, and it was a very good balance between offering themselves enough to actually progress in an efficient manner, but also not exposing themselves to getting the ball turned over high when they almost formed like a back 3 and the fullbacks went wide and pretty high when Belieber would form into like the central centre-back role as well. Arsenal midfield dynamics, I'm just going to discuss a little bit because I think Arsenal have a lot of injuries and that was by no means their first choice lineup. So I don't want to go into it too much. But I do think in terms of personnel selection, yes, Rice and Marino on transition, both the stop defensive transitions and on transition are pretty decent. But I would have liked a little bit more creativity in there. So at least when you have the ball against them and you can pin them a little bit more, you can be a bit more effective, especially given now you've lost your wide creativity in Saka. Yeah, Ethan and Murray had a good first half, but he's not offering you anywhere close to the same thing. So I thought these two 8s as a pairing probably never optimal for this type of game. But like I said, he's got a lot of injuries and he's dealing with a lot at the moment. So I don't really want to go into that too much, but it's just some food for thought. I remember we went through a period where the 4:30 slot on Super Sunday really wasn't delivering, and the enjoyment that we were getting out of those particular football games wasn't great, and it was getting a little bit boring. But recently, we've had the Liverpool City game, we've had the Man United City game, which was quite boring for most of it, but had a grandstand finish. The Liverpool Spurs game, 6-3. The Chelsea Spurs game, 4-3. And then this was actually my favorite of the lot, even though it was just, quote unquote, just 2-2. I would have liked Liverpool in the first half to consciously build more on the left-hand side and then utilize switches of play against a deeper United block to find Salah in those isolated positions. Gakpo's definitely got the range to hit those switches. It would have been nice if Szoboszlai was there, but he's not. But at least Gakpo. And then maybe even like a pass back to Van Dijk if he's to step up and then hit a diagonal into Trent, hit into Salah, just to find themselves a little bit more isolated. I think that would have been a good way to get one-on-one with Dalot without having Bruno Fernandes in some close proximity, which he did more and more within the first half as it went on. At the start, Salah was able to have Dalot a little bit isolated one-on-one, and there was a pocket space on his left-hand side, so he could utilize that and just ensure that Dalot didn't know which way he was going to go. For example, the pass from McAllister came from there, which McAllister probably should have finished, albeit a very difficult chance. And then, yeah, also just finding Trent in that half space a little bit more higher up the pitch. And I don't think it would have been easy for United to transition from that in particular, given how deep they already would have been and the fact that they would have been pinned. So that was one thing. But overall, I thought United defended really, really well. And we spoke about this, right? Their structure, how compact they were, the players they have, and how these type of games in particular suit not only their system but also their players. For example, Ugarte in this game was absolutely brilliant, and he was good against Manchester City as well, right? Albeit against City, I thought there was a need for more progressive passes, which is something that he hasn't got in the locker at the moment, I would say. But this type of game in particular, he was top and he suited well. Mainu, I thought had a good game, albeit not as good as the commentator, specifically Gary Neville, made out. I thought at times there was a need for a greater level of physicality, and I thought he had a few more flashy moments than Mainu, but also because he was getting on the ball a little bit more higher, in comparison to Ugarte, that it took away from how good Ugarte actually was today. And I thought he was definitely the better of the two. And if they were to have a little bit more physicality than Mainu, I thought they could have caused Liverpool's even more problems, especially even on transition. Right? Like imagine you had a Rice in there alongside Ugarte. Wow, that would have been one hell of a pivot for Liverpool to come up with. Liverpool have had their struggles against deeper blocks at times this season, and I think it's by far the most optimal approach to take against them. Is why I advocated for West Ham to play a back five and almost copy a similar setup to United, but they didn't. Obviously got beat 5-0. I actually spoke, I think, a little bit about Lenioro playing at right centre back in this game and how that was going to be a big deal, but obviously find himself for the bench, and then De Ligt doesn't have the best of games. The other thing is having more physical or just better athletes at wing back in terms of their ability to bomb forward, right? I'm specifically thinking about like Victor Moses in the title-winning season would, I think, really help United, especially on that right-hand side. So Ahmad has a little bit more help just on someone to overlap as well, because Mazraoui in general comes inside a lot more. So yeah, sure, he has someone who can give it to him, essentially, but I think having someone in the overlap would be very useful. Bruno Fernandes, one man of the match and deservedly so, was absolutely top today. And you will see my discussion on him in transfer plans. We could go on about this a little bit more, but it's not a matchup I expect Liverpool to have too often, because I don't think many teams will go against them with a back three in the same way that United did. But one thing to remember going forward is that when United have these big games, so for example, when Arsenal come to town, even if they are on a bad run of form, to consider that they're not easy to beat. And I think in these bigger games, they're very, very decent as a side. Liverpool, I obviously spoke about I would have liked more switches on the play in the first half and building from that left-hand side. I think these type of games is probably the one weapon in Curtis Jones' armory that he really doesn't have at the moment. And I quite would have liked Harvey Elliott to come on. Just someone to get in between the lines a little bit, to find a pocket here or there, and just to offer Liverpool something different. He is probably a better low block player than Curtis Jones. I think Jones is more suited to those games in transition. And even Gravenberch, to an extent, I think prefers those games which are slightly faster paced, albeit had a very good performance. And it's why someone like McAllister today was probably Liverpool's best player. And then on top of that, I think you would have definitely liked a bit more out of the fullbacks, both offensively and also defensively, specifically from a creative standpoint. So yeah, there are a lot of things to discuss, but overall, not too much to be translatable going forward in FPL, because I don't think these guys will encounter similar types of games, but absolutely brilliant watch nonetheless. I've come to the conclusion, and definitely later than I should have, that Brentford won't be contained this season. And yeah, obviously they've had their struggles away from home. And I'm not just saying it because they scored 5 or were made to look a little bit better than they actually are by a poor Southampton performance. But the coaching standard from Thomas Frank is so high, and they've got the necessary players to do it, especially with the profile of Johan Wissa and Lewis Potter on that left side and in the middle. And then obviously Brian Mbeumo is what you would just say is their best player, right? And poses so many different problems to the opposition side. I think against them, you really do need a certain standard physical profiles to be able to stop this transitional threat, which is huge. And the other thing is, last season, I remember at the start, I spoke about their midfield and how the composition of the midfield and the profiles they had in there, I didn't really think it was optimal for what Thomas Frank was trying to do. But even though he's not really playing like a specifically deeper role, which is what I discussed earlier in the early stages of last season, Damsgaard has been so useful, just almost as a floater, right? Popping up in the 10 positions, popping up in the 8. Sometimes he is going a little bit deeper to receive and almost just connecting everything. And he's been super useful So yeah, I think going forward, you can almost consider Brian Mbeumo and Johan Wissa fixture proof. City, yeah, sure, they conceded fairly late, but they could have conceded way earlier. Again, way too susceptible on transition. Too easy to just play through and don't have the legs in midfield. I'm very much thinking of selling Cosco Guardiola as a result. And to be honest, 4-1 certainly flattered them, considering the quality of performance, I would say. Like, you look at the second goal, right, and an unbelievable assist for Savio. The fourth goal was just a mistake, and albeit a slightly lucky finish for Foden as well. So there's that. Savio on this left-hand side is interesting. One thing that I had an issue with on the right-hand side was that he wasn't combining with Foden, for example, particularly well. But here, he was actually allowed to drift inside a little bit more, given Bernardo Silva doesn't always occupy the most advanced zone within the left half space. Also, Silva's definitely more of a... not like the door breaker type like Foden, right? He's not as insistent on having that final action to him. But I think Savio's probably got someone who's a little bit more generous in that regard. And I think that helps him. I think putting sometimes two superstars next to each other who want to have dominance over the final action and dictate how things are going to go isn't always the best thing. So I actually think having him there is really good. And in general, the threat he's posing going on the outside is good as well. And yeah, against Brentford, I think it'll be tough for them to keep a clean sheet, and I can expect some goals in there. We'll talk about Phil Foden when it comes to transfer plans. In my latest team selection, I discussed how there were 4 players primarily getting close to the chopping block: João Pedro, Cosco Guardiola, Phil Foden, and Nick Jackson. But following back-to-back 9-pointers, and the fact that he's just such a good facilitator at the price, and the fact that the fixtures are pretty good going forward, I'm almost set on not selling João Pedro. He was largely just a route into Mateta if Jackson looked to find some prolific form and João Pedro looked to continuously tail off, but that certainly doesn't look like it's going to be the case. Now, I have 2 frees, and I could use 0, I could use 1, or I could use 2 this week. But regardless of how many transfers I use, that'll be 1 or 2, if I am to use them, one of these 3 at least will be going, if not 2. The thing that puts me on Jackson a lot right now is the ceiling. I always like having players with big ceilings and having the ability to at least access huge upside in a somewhat realistic way. But with the standard of finishing at the moment, it's very difficult. Not only is he not putting the chances away, so I'm not getting the points in the first place, but it also hurts his ability to gain maximum bonus. And then he's not just going to have to get 1, which is proving a struggle at the moment, but he's going to have to get 2. Last season, we saw when he's not finishing well, his body language dropped, confidence drops quite a bit, and at least in terms of what we see in terms of his body language. And from there, it was difficult to get him back on track, right? To generate a certain level of returns once he's out of that good bit of form. In terms of the 2 finishes against Palace, I thought the first one was tough with the outside of his right foot, and he did very well to generate chance for himself in the first place. So I'm not really too bothered about that one. The second one, I think he should do better. And I think it's more so the fact that he's missed so many in recent weeks that the culmination of all of them together, people are getting a little bit annoyed about. The Bournemouth fixture is a good stylistic matchup for him. And I just think, okay, what if I give it 1 more week and he comes good? What if I proceed from there? Wolves away after is not great, but it's not, Wolves at home after is not great, but it's not too bad at all, right? And then City, with the way they're playing at the moment, could again be a good fixture. So in terms of the fixtures, overall, I would say they're pretty good over the next three weeks, and there's points there. However, Mateta, who's just scored, who's looking better, Palace are looking better, he's cheaper, and he allows me to upgrade elsewhere, or at least get funds out. Isn't that just so much safer, as opposed to betting on the fact that Jackson's going to come good? And the fact that Mark Gay came on, as opposed to Nkunku, shows that, like, even if Jackson's not playing well, and Nkunku's not playing well, there's still someone to take minutes off him, and I don't really want that. So him to Mateta is something I'm really considering, and I'll probably decide later on in the week. I'm not going to decide now. I allowed the price drop to happen. If it happened, I didn't even check. I just saw he was very much nailed on to fall, and then I will allow myself to decide from there. I think it's super close because at the moment I'm really trying to be as efficient with my transfers as possible with the double game week coming up. But not only that, right? Like, say the double game week was next week, I wouldn't be able to afford Arnie Slot or even Sean Dyche on the Sean with the assistant manager chip because I have to take funds out of players. So those are things I'm considering. However, with that in mind, if I were to sell these 3 players, I could do something like Foden to Bruno, Jackson to Mateta, Oscar Gvardiol up to Virgil van Dijk, and then I still have enough money for like a Sean Dyche assistant manager, right? So that's what I'm thinking about with that. In terms of Phil Foden replacements, the thing is, if he is to play at 10, like against Ipswich, let's say. I don't. Maybe he plays there against Brentford because I think you need legs in the midfield against Brentford, and De Bruyne's not really offering you that at the moment. So I think it would be smart to play him in the middle against Brentford, especially considering he scored a hat trick there last year. So it's fond memories. If he plays there, especially after getting his first goal, the momentum that he'll have now, and the fact that a burden will be lifted off his shoulders, I think that will be very beneficial for himself, and the prospect for us as managers will be pretty good. But if he's playing in that right wing role, I feel like I'm just trying to get lucky each and every week. And whilst the fixtures are good, I don't really want to be doing that. When there are so many good options there, Bruno, I think, has got two very good fixtures in Southampton at home, Brighton at home. I think Man United have found their best 11 now, which is today's one, apart from the fact that Lenny Euro should, in my opinion, be playing over De Ligt to right centre-back. However, Garnacho has a good cameo, so what happens if Mainu doesn't play some minutes and Bruno goes into the pivot? Maybe he's not such a good option then. Okay, but what about Eze or Sarr? Those fixtures for Palace are really good. They're also a lot cheaper. They allow me to get funds out. They're playing in a better position. I would say overall, their fundamentals, both of them, are probably better at the moment. And I quite like the idea of just stacking Palace, Munoz, Sarr or Mateta. I mean, Sarr or Eze, and then also getting Mateta, and looking to maximize my upside, but also cash in on some very good fixtures. And they've got Leicester this week, right? So I'd be missing out on some immediate upside if I weren't to make the move. And then lastly, Oscar Gvardiol. Now there's two routes I can go here. Well, the reason I want to take him out is because City just look poor defensively, and I don't really think at that price tag I can just be like, oh, he might get attacking returns, and that can offset the defensive woes. No, I really need both at that price tag, or at least like a higher likelihood of a clean. Not like he's going to score every single game. There's two options for me, and only two. Virgil van Dijk, get him in early. Konate's back, and it's very good in terms of planning for the double. I won't have to use a transfer down the line. Or get Munoz, leaves me with funds for example, the assistant manager chips, or moves elsewhere, albeit I don't really need too much money at the moment, given how my team is looking and just the general landscape of things, and capitalize on the fixture run and the fact that he's been so unfortunate not to return more points for owners than he has done already. So I think I've rode my luck a little bit there, and just getting on him for the good fixture run I think would be quite intelligent. So those are the 4, 5, 6 players that I'm really considering. And in terms of how many moves I make, I'm not sure. The one move I really do want to make is Gvardiol, because I think it'd be surprising to see them keep a clean sheet. But I can only get Van Dijk if I sell one of the other two. So if I get Van Dijk, I'll be making 2 moves. Otherwise, it might be Gvardiol to Munoz and just reassess and then go from there. That is all she wrote for this video, ladies and gentlemen. If you did enjoy, drop a like on the video and subscribe if you have not already, whether you're a new viewer or a regular viewer who just hasn't clicked the button yet. I hope you had a brilliant game week, and I shall see you very shortly for everything you need to know. In the meantime, have a great week, and goodbye.